Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I'm Dr. Anjali Demari from the Department of English, Guwahati University. The paper that we are doing is paper 13, module 35, and the subject is South Asia, Sri Lanka. The aim of this module is to make you aware of the causes of the civil war in Sri Lanka and the impact it had on women. So, let me introduce to you the country, the island nation Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is situated in the Indian Ocean to the south of India. The island nation of Ceylon got independence from British rule on 4th of February 1948. Later, in 1972, the island was renamed Sri Lanka. The role of women in the history of Sri Lanka has been quite inspirational. In 1931, Sri Lanka became one of the first countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America to allow women to vote. The country has also produced the first woman Prime Minister of the world. Women in this island nation are engaged in various kinds of jobs: teachers, doctors, political leaders, laborers, etc. However, the women in the lower strata of the society, who constitute majority of the population, are denied a decent living. There are four major ethnic groups in Sri Lanka. 1. Sinhalese, comprising of 71% of Sri Lankan population. Sri Lankan Tamils, comprising of 11% of the population. Indian Tamils, 9%. And 4th, Sri Lankan Moors, comprising of 7% of the total population. Tamils in Sri Lanka are of two categories. The Ceylon Tamils have been living in Sri Lanka for generations, and the Indian Tamils who were brought from India as plantation workers during the British rule. The citizenship issue was related to the second category of Tamils. Jaffna, a province in the north of Sri Lanka and also the eastern province, is home to a large number of Tamils. The problem of Tamil citizenship became serious when the political party of Sri Lankan Tamils, Tamil United Liberation Front, demanded an independent Tamil nation state called Elam. The Tamil leadership was taken over by militant organization Liberation Tigers of Tamil Elam, LTTE, under Velupillai Prabhakaran in 1976. The conflict between the Sinhalese and the Tamils that broke out in July 1983 killed thousands of Tamils. Thousands of others became refugees in India. Thousands of women in north and east of Sri Lanka had to move to safe places for survival. They lost their husbands in the war, and their children disappeared too. They fell into the category of internally displaced persons. In the south, thousands of widows of state armed forces personnel had to head their households. Now let us look into the history of the whole problem. The genesis of the problem in Sri Lanka began with the British. As in other cases, they left Sri Lanka also a divided society at the time of their departure in 1948, when Ceylon, as it was called then, won its independence. The Tamils had been given priority over the native Sinhalese population by the British in terms of education and employment, which had led to resentment among them. After independence, in the following 3 decades, the majority Sinhalese population implemented certain practices that were discriminatory towards the Tamils. This in turn gave rise to resentment among the Tamilians, leading to hostility between the two sections. The Tamil people of the north and the east of the island, where their numbers were substantial, formed militant organizations to fight against the discrimination. Eventually, this became the LTTE, Liberation Tamil Tigers of Elam. They demanded an independent and separate state. The ensuing battle caused the deaths of more than 40,000 people, and according to the UN, 300,000 people became refugees. Let us now discuss the social structure of the Tamil society. The social structure of Tamil society was a conservative one. Women's place was clearly defined. Her domain was the domestic one, and her responsibility was primarily to be the homemaker and the nurturer of the family. Women were considered to be the bearers of culture and preservers of community values and practices. Young girls were conditioned to play these roles from a young age so that when they grew up and were married, they would have no confusion in their minds about their areas of work and their tasks. When a girl was married, her father handed over the responsibility of providing for his daughter and protecting her from her husband. Thus, the lives of Tamil women were sheltered and confined. All these changed drastically when the Civil War started. Since Tamilian women were unfamiliar with the larger processes of politics or with those matters that operated in the public domain, they were at a complete loss when they lost their men in the conflicts and found themselves as heads of their families and responsible for running them. In order to survive, they had to learn very quickly how to function, which became more difficult since the normal working of society no longer existed. They were victimized by the Sri Lankan army. Hundreds of women were raped, abducted, and tortured for information if they were suspected of having any links with the LTTE or of having male members of the family in it. The impact of this new situation was highly traumatic for not only the Tamilian women but for Tamil society as a whole. Now, let us discuss women in the LTTE. Women in large numbers had joined the LTTE. Some records say that their numbers were in fact more than men. There were two reasons for this. One was to fight and support the cause for which the LTTE was fighting. They believed in what the LTTE was fighting for and were desirous of having a separate state called Elam. They felt that the Sinhalese had exploited them for far too long, treating them like slaves. The frequencies of police atrocities against them were countless. They were convinced that this was the only way to lead better lives and the civil war was inevitable. They wanted to have their own nation which would be marked by equality and justice. The second reason was the security they felt they would have as members of the LTTE against the horrors inflicted by the Sri Lankan army. However, their expectations were belied since, as it was discovered later by fact-finding missions, that there was exploitation of women even within the LTTE cadres. Rape has been a consistent feature of the civil war in Sri Lanka. The horrors of rape of the Tamil women by the Sri Lankan soldiers is a fact acknowledged by several reports, some of them of the UN. Within the LTTE, initially, women were expected to serve in the traditional roles that used to be given to women in the defense forces, that is, support roles like looking after the wounded and doing secretarial work. This was in keeping with the attitudes of the conservative elements of the LTTE. But the women slowly graduated to more active roles of combat, especially in the guerrilla conflicts. There was even an artillery section in the LTTE for women where they were trained in warfare.
The Tamil Tiger female soldiers in action in a recent battle against the Sri Lankan army. Most of these women are under 25, trained to kill and fight on the front line. They may be banned as a terrorist organisation in the West, but here in their heartland of northern Sri Lanka they are freedom fighters. This territory is Tamil Tiger's stronghold, and their formidable female fighting force say they are prepared to die to keep it that way. 20-year-old Malati shows us her prowess with the machine gun. She says she joined the LTTE at 19.
I feel satisfied when I kill the enemy. The hardest part is to face the shelling.
Off the battlefield, a softer side of Malati comes through.
It is women and children that are affected the most in a war. That is why women make better soldiers.
But what of her own future and children?
I will think about becoming a mother after we get our homeland.
She shows me her hero, the Tiger's first female suicide bomber. Would she do it?
If the leader permits me, yes.
None of the female soldiers get paid a wage, but they are ready to do anything for their commander, the elusive Prabhakaran, who they call our national leader.
He is commander, leader, mother, father, everything to me.
Voluntarily or coerced, many Tamil families in the north and east of Sri Lanka will give up one of their children to join the struggle. It is allegations of child recruitment and suicide bombing tactics that have put LTTE on the list of terrorist organisations in 33 countries.
They in fact bettered the men in the areas of sharpshooting. An unexpected outcome of the civil war was the changed social position of women. Upheavals caused by death and displacement often result in the boundaries between social and sexual roles becoming diffused. Once women were assimilated into the LTTE, many positive changes were introduced aiming at making Tamil society gender sensitive. Recognizing the value of women and girls in a society, education was encouraged for them. The rampant dowry system was abolished and women began to be more visible in public positions. From the point where they had been confined to the home and domestic responsibilities, they were suddenly catapulted to a point where they were in decision-making positions and had to not only manage their families but try and even ensure their survival. This newfound freedom was being experienced for the first time. Women have demonstrated time and time again in all parts of the world which have seen such sudden changes in role and responsibility caused by war and conflict or natural disasters or collapses of economic systems or other catastrophes that they can be unexpectedly resourceful and resilient. The women of Sri Lanka also demonstrated similar characteristics. They managed to survive. However, the cost of survival came at a very heavy price and thousands paid with their lives. Indeed, it is one of the bitter ironies of war that even when women are not the ones to begin them, wars are fought on the bodies of women, and they are the targets of all kinds of violence and affected by the loss of home, family, and community. Often, however, the newfound independence and freedom that women achieve disappears when situations normalize. The men in the families are the ones who are most resistant to the new roles and push the women back into their pre-war positions. Now let us have a look at the alleged genocide happening in Sri Lanka. In a report indicting the Sri Lankan government, Yasmin Suka states, and I quote, "Abduction, arbitrary detention, torture, rape and sexual violence have increased in the post-war period. These widespread and systematic violations by the Sri Lankan security forces occur in a manner that indicates a coordinated, systematic plan approved by the highest levels of government," unquote. Troubling too is the fact that the population rate of the Tamils in Sri Lanka has been decreasing steadily. The facts and figures seem to indicate that the practices that are being followed to arrive at the decreasing population numbers have the tacit support of the highest authorities, and a blind eye is turned at many of the malpractices. One of the most common method is the enforced sterilizations of Tamil women. There have been cases reported where if the women have refused to get themselves sterilized, they have been told they would not be able to access government medical facilities. An indicative statistic reveals that although the growth rate of the entire country is 14%, the population figures of the Tamilians have been dropping annually by 5%. Such figures narrate the story of genocide and comes under the UN Genocide Convention with clear legal stipulations. There have been mounting requests to the UN for proper investigations to be conducted and punishment meted out to the guilty. Again, as the figures indicate, the women are the ones who are paying the price, since no cases of forced male sterilizations have been reported. Now let us discuss rise of women's groups to promote peace. The Northern Mothers Front protested against the deaths and disappearances of young men and called for political negotiations to solve the ethnic crisis. Another group, Women for Peace, was formed in 1984 in the South, which highlighted the menace of internal displacement. This group collected over 10,000 signatures calling for peace and harmony in the region through political dialogue between the government and Tamil political leadership. Now let us discuss women in guerrilla groups. A large number of women joined LTTE in fear of being killed or raped by the security forces. They were trained in warfare. Anthropologist Margaret Trawick revealed that girls joined LTTE because they believed they were safest among the rebels in the jungle. The female wing of LTTE Women's Front aimed at securing the self-determination of Tamilians and eliminating all forms of social, political and economic inequality. The guerrilla outfit LTTE was also famed for suicide bombings and for the recruitment of child soldiers. The female combatants were organized into Black Tigers who carried on suicide bombings. One such bomb was used to assassinate the former Prime Minister of India, Rajiv Gandhi, in 1991. However, the women combatants had no liberty to surrender or move out of LTTE even if they desired to do so. Besides, many women were subjected to internal oppression within the insurgent group. Now let us look into what was India's involvement in all of these. India soon bore the responsibility for the safety of Tamils in Sri Lanka and signed an agreement with the Sri Lanka government in 1987 to disarm LTTE. It was decided that the Tamil majority North and East provinces were to be integrated to provide autonomy to the Tamils. But this idea was rejected by LTTE. The Indian Peacekeeping Force, IPKF, was sent to Sri Lanka, which had a tough combat with the militant organization. The IPKF then tried to demobilize the LTTE by force and ended up in full-scale conflict with them. The IPKF also soon met stiff opposition from the Tamils. Simultaneously, nationalist sentiment led many Sinhalese to oppose the continued Indian presence in Sri Lanka. The 3-year-long conflict was also marked by the IPKF being accused of committing various abuses of human rights by many human rights groups as well as some within the Indian media. However, these peacekeeping groups ended up exploiting Tamil girls sexually and committing large-scale human rights violation. Casualties among the IPKF mounted and calls for the withdrawal of the IPKF from both sides of the Sri Lankan conflict grew. In this context, it is important to note that several reports of misconduct by the peacekeeping forces sent in 2 areas of conflict have themselves been guilty of exploitation, especially exploitation of women. Reports have come in from many parts of the world where conflict has been ongoing. This has led to the Secretary General of the UN to make a statement of zero tolerance of such actions and a specified strict code of conduct to be followed. However, following his defeat in Indian parliamentary elections in December 1989, the new Prime Minister VP Singh ordered the withdrawal of the IPKF, and the last ship left Sri Lanka on 24 March 1990. The civil war in Sri Lanka caught the attention of the world and the world press. Horror stories of the atrocities being committed by both the Sri Lankan military and the members of the LTTE began to appear in the media. This resulted in pressure being created for the early resolution of the conflict. The consequences were grave as over 1,000 Indian soldiers lost their lives. The 32-month presence of the IPKF in Sri Lanka resulted in the deaths of 1,200 Indian soldiers and over 5,000 Sri Lankans. The cost for the Indian government was estimated at over 10.3 billion. Over 20,000 women had filed missing reports of their loved ones. Various human rights organizations accused Sri Lanka of genocide. The civil war, which lasted over 2 decades, saw over 1 million people displaced. Hundreds of women were tortured and raped. Reliable statistics have never been so far found. To conclude, an attempt was made in this paper, in this module in fact, South Asia, to cover almost all the burning issues of violence against women in the face of conflict in the entire South Asian region. These third world nations are more or less facing the same challenges of political and economic transformation. Heterogeneity in caste, class and religion is the genesis of many conflicts in South Asia. Patriarchy prevails in various forms and has strongly challenged women liberation. It has been witnessed that the governments in these 5 South Asian nations at some point of time or the other have failed to address the livelihood problems of the lower strata in society. Gender-sensitive governance has never been an area of discussion and deliberation. The following issues need immediate implementation. Illiteracy has been one of the root causes of underdevelopment of South Asia, giving rise to cultural obsession and religious fundamentalism. The various terrorist groups targeting women's education signifies the power of knowledge. Reaching the highest levels of education, especially for women, should be the goal. Insensitive laws like AFSPA, if not scrapped completely, should at least be revised immediately to erase discriminatory clauses that protect the army personnel from legal suit. More women should be accommodated in the country's armed forces, and police forces should be more public-friendly. Government policies should be gender-sensitive, giving women more opportunities for political participation. Women combatants should be compulsorily included in decision-making related to peace talks with the government. Efforts should be best made to expand the capabilities of women in conflict zones. The police should cooperate with human rights activists, both local and international, and if needed, should give them security. All the South Asian modules very briefly. Continued insurgency and terrorism in India have challenged the survival and security of women, particularly in Jammu and Kashmir and Northeast India. Draconian laws like Armed Forces Special Powers Act free the soldiers from legal prosecution for crimes like rape, killing on suspicion, etc. Conflict-induced displacement is affecting the social and mental well-being of women in India. Women's security and their social, political and economic status in Pakistan are undermined by hardened social biases, discriminatory legislation and unresponsive state institutions. Over the years, many women activists, officials and teachers have been threatened, attacked and at times killed by Taliban. In June 2013, militants blew up a bus carrying female university students at Quetta. Pakistan-backed Taliban movement in Afghanistan denied women basic human rights. The Bonn Agreement marked the beginning of gender-sensitive policies in Afghanistan. Susan Bromiller argued that what was unique to Bangladesh Liberation War was that the international community for the first time recognized that systematic rape could be used as a weapon to terrorize people. Various Islamic groups oppose women liberation, Western codes of conduct, law and ethics, and dress and culture. They hail the Parda system. They favor the establishment of Sharia or Islamic law. A large number of women joined LTT in fear of being killed or raped by the security forces. They were trained in warfare. The civil war, which lasted over 2 decades in Sri Lanka, saw over 1 million people displaced. Hundreds of women were tortured and raped. So in this particular paper, that is South Asia, we looked into the countries India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, and we especially looked into what were the reasons which led to the conflict in these countries and how especially women were impacted. And we have summarized this in the last portion, and I hope that all of this is clear to you. Thank you.